Hello, everybody. My name is Myra Merritt-Grant, and I'm here today to just share some of my own personal experiences that happened throughout my life with racism or injustices. And I'm here with my granddaughter, whose name is Sydney, and Sydney Spute, actually, and she's from Seattle, Washington. And I have to thank her profusely, because if it were not for Sydney, we would not be doing this video. I have no idea how you're supposed to do this. But anyway, I am a professor of voice at Bowling Green State University, and I've been there for about 25 years. This was the end of my 25th year. And it's been a great experience. But I just wanted to share some things about my life. Growing up, I actually grew up in the 1950s, which is a long time ago. And when I was born, segregation was legal. And I was born in Washington, D.C., and the public schools were not integrated until the mid-1950s with the ruling of Brown versus Board of Education. And it was with that ruling that segregation was ruled unconstitutional. And so the schools had to be integrated. And somehow my mother and I ended up on the front page of either the Washington Post newspaper or the Washington Evening Star. And my mother has me by my hand, and she marched me into the school that had previously been all white. And she said, "This is going to be your school now." And it was all, I didn't even know what was going on, but we were integrating the schools, and we ended up on the front page. I didn't really know what was going on, but all I knew was I was going to a different school than the one that my brother and sister had attended. I am the youngest of 3 children in our family. And I really enjoyed school, especially kindergarten, because our teacher was musical and she played the piano, and I just remember singing all day. And I made good friends with a little girl in the classroom who was white, and we used to play together all the time. And once she invited me to come to her home so we could play a little bit. Now, we didn't live far from each other. We lived probably a couple of blocks from each other, but she lived in a neighborhood that was all white on both sides of the street. I lived around the corner in a neighborhood that was all black on both sides of the street, and we just didn't mingle. But she invited me to come home to play with her, and we were walking down the street, and all of a sudden, I guess it was mostly women who came out on their front porches, and they started screaming at us, especially her. And they said, "What are you doing bringing that little colored girl in our neighborhood? You know she doesn't belong here." And she was not frightened. I was terribly frightened, but she was not. And she said, "She's not colored. She just has a suntan." And I said to her softly, "I don't have a suntan." And I said, "I think I'd better go home." So I turned and I walked home. I never forgot that experience. I remember that vividly, walking down the street. And it just goes to show you the kind of impact that racism can have on a person, especially at a young age. It was frightening to me, and racism is something you can feel. And I don't think that most white people really understand the hurt that it causes. And it makes one feel unimportant. It makes you feel irrelevant, that you don't matter, that you've done something in your life that you deserve to be mistreated. And that's a terrible thing because, we're all God's children. And we all have been created by him, no matter what color you are. But anyway, at the time that I was born, I remember signs that said white only or for coloreds. And my father used to take us out in his car on Sunday afternoons, and we would go for drives. And Washington, D.C. is so close to Maryland and Virginia. And once we stopped at this ice cream place. It was not in Washington, D.C. It was in Maryland, I think. And we stopped to get some ice cream. And my father went in to get us all ice cream cones. And he came back to the car kind of quickly with no ice cream. And we said, "What happened?" And he just quietly said, "They don't serve colors." And can you imagine the impact that has on a man in front of his family? And you could just hear a pin fall. For the rest of the ride, we were just all very silent. Another incident that comes to my mind was when I was a little bit older from elementary school, and I went to Peabody Conservatory of Music, which is in Baltimore, Maryland. I was the only school where I auditioned, and it was the only place where I wanted to go. And I didn't decide that I wanted to be a music major until like my last year of high school. I didn't have much training until my last year of high school, and then I realized I do have a voice, and maybe I could do something with this voice. I didn't really think I could really have a career, but I thought maybe I could do something with this voice. And so I only auditioned at one school, and that was Peabody Conservatory of Music. And there were only a handful of Black students there at the time, not even as many as 10, I think. There were a group of singers, including myself. I was the only Black student, though, in this little group of about 5. We were put in a special class for theory because we didn't know much of anything about theory or piano skills, or we didn't have any to speak of. And so they put us in our own little class. And we had this adorable little teacher. His name was Dr. Chestnut, and we just adored him. He was so kind to us. Called to the dean's office, and one by one, we went in individually, and he wanted to tell us about our particular situation. And we got together that evening, and we said, we talked about how nervous we were in front of the dean and what he had to say to us. And I said to them, the other 4 girls, I said, "Well, how did you feel when he said to you, you need to leave the school?" And it was like a hush came in the room. And one by one, they said, "He didn't say that to me." And the other person said, "I never heard him say that." And then, as we went around the room, then I realized, I'm the only Black student who was called in, and I'm the only one who was told that I needed to leave the school. And what he said to me was, "You don't have the kind of background that we want our students to have. You're not going to do well here. You need to leave, and you need to find maybe a state school, but you don't belong here." And Peabody had always had a reputation for racism, in all honesty. There was a very famous opera singer who was born in 1912. Her name was Anne Brown. And she was from Baltimore, and she wanted to go to Peabody. But Peabody did not accept her, and they told her because she was Black. So she went to Juilliard, where they did accept her, And she went on and she had a great career. She was the first Bess in George Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. He chose her personally. And she went on and she did a lot of her singing in Europe, and she eventually married somebody from Norway. But anyway, what saved me at Peabody was that there was an opera singer who came to the school and she did a master class. And she was only working with the DMA students, the master students, the upper class students. And my name was on the list, but I didn't expect her to call me. And I was sitting in the back of the hall, like a lot of freshmen, and giggling and not being very serious. And for some reason, we got to the end of the class, and she said, "We're running out of time. I would really like to hear Schubert's Gretchen am Spinnrad, sung by Myra Merritt." I almost fell out of the chair. I swallowed my gum. And I went up on stage. The hall was packed, and there was a music critic there. The place, the community was there, the school was there. It was a big deal. Jenny Terrell was a big name in those days, and I sang, and she was very excited about me. And I remember her telling me that I moved around too much. But she was impressed with my singing. And the critic wrote about me in the paper. That was the first time I'd ever been mentioned by a music critic in the newspaper. But anyway, that dean never said a word to me anymore after that. He didn't speak to me. He just ignored me like I didn't exist. But he definitely wanted me out of the school. But I'm glad I stayed. I had a great education. I had a teacher who was very supportive of me, and I had many, many wonderful experiences there. So I'm thankful that I stayed. And I think in light of what's going on in the world today, I think it's these young millennials, like my granddaughter here, who are going to really change the history of this country. I'm so glad to see Blacks and whites and Native Americans and brown young people out there fighting for justice for all of us. Because even though it makes you feel like you're not worthy, Black lives do matter. Thank you.